Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you doing, Ken?
I'm exceptionally well. Thank you for asking, Rory. Delighted to be here, and both Rory and I are delighted that you've joined us for the Counselling Tutor Podcast. You've joined us at episode 264. 3 topics on today's journey, starting off with that theory and practice, where today we're going to be delving into phenomenology, looking at the philosophy of phenomenology and counselling. We're then moving into practice today, where we look at those contemporary issues, those challenges, what's going on right now. And today we're going to be speaking about what happens when you get a counselling client and you have this feeling that you actually don't like this person. Something comes up for you. We're going to be discussing that in practice today. And then in Practice Matters, that's the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. We continue with our series of looking at what a professional body is, how they operate, and what they actually do. And Rory spoke with Meg Moss, Head of Policy and Public Affairs at the National Counselling Society, about the campaigns that they are involved in. Maybe stuff that we don't see that a professional body gets involved in. But starting us off with that theory and practice, Rory, my favourite word of all, phenomenology, because it always reminds me of the Muppets, where it goes phenomenology, do, as I've said on previous podcasts. But phenomenology linked to the philosophy of phenomenology, because it is a philosophy, I guess, and how that informs counselling.
Yes, and I think before we get to phenomenology, it might be just useful to have a little meander down the philosophical background to psychology in general. And we can go back as far as a guy called Wilhelm Maximilian Wundt, who was a philosopher. And then he was the person who said, let's start measuring things. And what happened was that from that, psychology was born, and the tributary of psychotherapy started to form from that. And then we can look at Sigmund Freud. He drew a lot on Greek mythology, works of Sophocles, Electra, and Oedipus were parts of his theory. Albert Ellis, he looked at the philosophy of Stoicism. He talked about Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, Stoic philosophy, as the basis. So when Rogers came to form his view of person-centered therapy, he really had to draw on the tradition that anybody in the world of counselling and psychotherapy had a philosophical base. And part of that base that he drew on was phenomenology, which is it's the structure of consciousness, and also it's the way we perceive ourselves in the world. And he drew from the world of Edmund Husserl and Martin Heidegger, who were reasonably contemporary philosophers at the time Rogers was around. And he made he transferred that idea of phenomenology into his idea of personality, which was the 19 propositions, which featured in client-centered therapy in 1951. So that's a little bit of a walkthrough of the history of philosophy and psychology, Ken.
Thank you very much for that, Rory. And I guess when we're speaking about phenomenology and we say, what is it? It is how you, listening to this, see, experience, and think about your interactions with the world around you. It's phenomenological in that it is unique to you. It is your life. It is your experience. It is your consciousness that is interacting with this field around us, this world around us. And you will feel that, or you will have that phenomenological experience that is 100% unique to you. And I guess we speak, when we refer to person-centered theory, about a frame of reference where empathy is about trying to see through the eyes of the client. And that keys in to that philosophy of phenomenology. Phenomenology, what am I saying? See, I told you it was my favorite word, phenomenology. Because that the client in front of us is having their unique experience of who they are and the world that they interact with. And it can be very different to ours. It can be very different to ours. And it's about us putting our thoughts, views, feelings, and I'm putting air quotes up and saying our reality, because the reality that we hold, of course, is our phenomenological view of what reality is for us based on the experiences that we've had, how we grew up, the road we've walked, and how we interact with our world. And putting that one side can be quite tricky because our whole experience is phenomenological, but we're kind of asked to kind of set that aside when working with a client who will bring their phenomenological view. They're going to bring their truth of how the world is for them, Rory.
Absolutely. And I think a useful exercise for this that I used to do when I taught was to get two people to look out the class window and write down what they saw. Don't tell anybody, and then sit back in the class, and then I'd ask them individually what they saw. And two people looking out the same window can see very different things. Some people saw buildings and trees, other people saw cars and people. But that is a phenomenological experiment because their reality was based in what they experienced, and they both experienced different things. And that's really, really important. And Ken speaks on a very important part of being a therapist, and that is to suspend your own phenomenological reality and try and enter the phenomenological reality of others, to see it from their eyes, to I guess, to use a cliched term, to walk in their shoes, to see the world as they experience it. And I think that's the challenge of being a therapist, isn't it? To put your frame of reference to one side, to bracket it, and then enter that other person's frame of reference and see what's going on for them, experience what's going on for them, with all the attached thoughts and feelings that goes with that person's view of the world.
Oh, I like how you've kind of phrased that, Rory, and that really keys into phenomenology. There it is again, phenomenology. In that, that there is a thought sense of phenomenology as well. In terms, if I think of my friend Rory, that I do podcasts with. So at the moment I can see you. But if you're not there, certain thoughts and feelings come up when I think of who you are. And Mrs. Counselling Tutor may have very different thoughts and feelings when she thinks who you are. And you, Rory, will probably have very different thoughts and feelings again when you think of who you are yourself. And that's an interesting part of phenomenology, is that it can live in consciousness. It can just be thoughts and ideas. And I guess that it's about clarifying and trying to understand, when we're working with a client, how they see something. I recall being warned many years ago that if a person should say to you that they are expecting a baby, they are pregnant, it's not always appropriate to say, "Oh, congratulations," because it's phenomenological. It's wherever, for them, it might not be that way. So we need to kind of, I guess, tread lightly in terms of our own thoughts, feelings, and our own reality and how we experience the world. I remember many years ago doing CPD around arranged marriages. Now, it was really interesting because I'd been fed by the media and they used the word forced marriages, not arranged marriages. That's a phenomenological view on that. My daughter's friend is part of a family where there are arranged marriages and is so happy and excited about that. Not oh, what is this that I have to go into? And it's really interesting. I found myself checking my own reality and realizing, hold on a second, there's more to this, and being made up of those phenomenological kind of reactions is, I guess, in a way, it makes it pretty challenging to be there with a client and truly be in their frame of reference. But there are things that we can kind of watch out for and make sure that we educate ourselves, and most importantly, ask clarifying questions. Oh, Christmas is coming up and I've got to go and do the shopping. I wonder what Christmas means for you. Well, it's actually a really tough time for me because I lost my dad over Christmas, as opposed to, oh, well, there's going to be a break, and are you doing anything nice this Christmas? It's we tread lightly, I guess.
We do. I always think of I always think of when you're working in a client's frame of reference being a bit like it being in a china shop, and being very careful. I like that term, tread lightly. And don't go in like the proverbial bull in a china shop, tread lightly, and sometimes just be thoughtful of what the client's saying and try and get a really strong sense of what it means to them. And there's actually a German word that sums this up. It was one that was coined by Martin Heidegger, and it's Dasein. Dasein, spelt Dasein, and it means being in the world. Ooh. How you are in the world, own being, own truth in the world, Dasein. And it's an interesting perspective because that's our stock in trade as therapists, I think, trying to understand someone's being in the world, trying to understand their unique view of the world. So if you are doing an assignment, pop that in. Martin Heidegger design. You get extra marks for that. I guess probably you might do, but it's really interesting, and I also think that phenomenology speaks strongly to our own personal development. It speaks very, very strongly to how we exist in the world and what is real for us, and what are those introjected values and conditions of worth? Are they our own experience? Are they our own unique experience of the world? Or are they someone else's that's been overlaid on us? And, through the arc of training, we unpick that, don't we? We look at our own Dasein, our own being in the world.
Yeah. It's so interesting, I love that this is based in philosophy because it kind of allows me to step off the path of theory into I guess my own phenomenology and what I think about it and what I feel about this topic and subject. I remember as a much younger man thinking to myself, does everybody see red like I see it? The color red that I see, is it the same color red that you see? Or are you just taught from a very young age that I'm pointing at right now is red and I'm taught the same? But do we see it the same? Do we experience it the same? And the thing is, it's not really possible to measure that because consciousness is a very unique and individual experience. And science as of yet cannot prove consciousness. We can't say with any certainty that a table is not conscious. We can presume it's not conscious because it doesn't show any kind of signs of being conscious, but we cannot prove that it is not conscious. And it's also very difficult to prove that something is conscious. Consciousness is kind of the awareness of who I am. I am me. So therefore I know that, I know my place in the world, and I will construct my picture around that. And that, again, phenomenology, I look at who I was as a younger man, I look at who I am today, and much has changed. Much that was a truth and that I lived my life by is no longer a truth. In fact, some of them very opposite to how they were when I was back in those times. And I have no doubt that through continuing personal and professional development, my experiences will change further, and my phenomenology will always be mine, but it will be different to how it was at a different time. And I think that is also an interesting thing to keep in mind when working with a client. I'm thinking now of of a moment where they might say, and I'm just going to pick anything here, I have this partner, I've fallen out with this partner is terrible and bad, and we're there in that present moment with how they're feeling in that present moment. And if we are left with a phenomenological view that the partner is bad, and then 3 sessions later the client is saying, my partner, and they brought me chocolates and flowers, and we went on a lovely weekend, they might very well change where they are. And we need to understand and allow for, I guess, that change in a person's frame of reference from one day to another, not be married to, not hang on to, not hold on to, because then it becomes our introjection into that relationship. Oh, Rory, I could go on all day because I'm in the philosophy now.
Well, you're in there, aren't you, Ken? You're definitely in the design for sure, the being in the world. Yeah, and I think, again, to pick up on your point, it's fluid, isn't it?
Yeah.
One of the things that we see when we're working with clients is that their views of the world may be very fluid, and not. You may get some people who have very fixed views. I know a lot of people have very fixed views on things, but sometimes people's views can be fluid. And they engage in that kind of dialogue with themselves about what to them is reality. And you're part of that process as a therapist. I think you're trying to help the client make sense of what actually is their reality in the service of them feeling better about themselves, or affecting some form of cure for themselves, so they feel better and feel released and can be a different person. And I guess that's what therapy is about. People coming with an issue and being able to say, actually, I don't think I want to do that anymore. I think I will change my philosophical view of the world. And we don't use those terms. I don't say to clients, are we coming in to have a little bit of an inspection of design? And are we going to have a look at phenomenology? They'd probably look at me quite blank. Some might not, some might enjoy that. But generally speaking, we use that by, as Ken said in the beginning, suspending our own frame of reference and entering the client's frame of reference. And we use it by, we also facilitate that by use of skills, reflection and paraphrase. Use of questioning to clarify, and help the client clarify where they want to be in the world. It permeates every single therapy, phenomenology. No matter which therapy you're practicing, there is a phenomenological aspect to it, I think.
There is, and it's with you wherever you go. It's with your client wherever they go, and it sits in your therapy room. That is theory and practice. And of course, Rory's made a super duper handout. As always, this is really good. If you are a student of counselling, you're going to want to get this. It's Phenomenology Explained. It's a little PDF that you can download, and to get hold of that, go to counsellingtutor.com. That's on my other website. Click on the podcast tab. Go to episode 264. That's where you're going to find the show notes of today's episode. Right there on that page, you can download a PDF on Phenomenology Explained, written up for you by Rory. It's nice and concise. It's got just the stuff you need, especially if you're doing an assignment. Theory to Practice is proudly sponsored by CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com. I'm Ken Kelly, and I've got a real burning passion for counselling skills. I've built training that takes the doubt out of using counselling skills. You get to see the counselling skills used in real live sessions by a qualified therapist. Full sessions, real material, real counselling skills. To find out more, go to CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com. Right, so there you go. That's us backing out of theory and practice today. And then moving forward into practice today, the contemporary issues, challenges, wins in counselling. And today we're speaking about counselling a client you don't like. Does that happen, Rory? Surely we are called upon to exercise unconditional positive regard.
Well, it's interesting. It's a topic that comes up in our Facebook page quite often, where someone will say, well, what happens if you engage with a client you don't like? And there's lots of people who kind of contribute to that. And if you want to join our Facebook page, if you go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor, knock on the door, our friendly moderator will let you in. You can join thousands and thousands of like-minded people talking about topics in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. We have students, we have qualified colleagues, And we also have tutors and supervisors all talking about issues related to counselling and psychotherapy. And counselling a client you don't like, something that's come up, Ken, quite often as a supervisor, someone will say, I don't like this client. And I don't know if I've ever mentioned this, but sometimes I look to transference and ask the question, does the client remind you of anybody? Is it their tone or their dress or the way they smell, the aftershave or perfume or the deodorant they're using or the way they speak? Because sometimes we can get caught in the past, and transference, very simply put, is putting the thoughts and feelings of a previous relationship and kind of overlaying them onto a new relationship. And, so you might, I've spoken about this before in the podcast, where you might meet someone and they remind you of a teacher you didn't like. And you put all the feelings of that teacher onto that person, which is unfair because they're a different person. But also it's useful, I think, to take that to supervision and examine why you don't like them. What is it that is giving you those vibes? And to answer the question that you asked, can you counsel someone you don't like? Yes, you can. I don't think that there's a principled position of saying, I don't like this person, I'm not going to counsel them.
Yeah.
I think that it's a case of taking that to supervision. I'll kind of bracket that by saying, if that feeling is so overwhelming you can't engage in a therapeutic relationship, then it may be useful to make a polite referral, but take it to supervision first and try and examine why you don't like that person.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting topic, and you've kind of hit the nail on the head. This topic lives in supervision. It really does. As soon as you're feeling something internally when a client is coming, and it doesn't have to be not liking a client. It might be I'm really looking forward to this next client. You might be overly excited to see a client, or feel a trepidation or an anxiety when a client is coming. And it's when it lives in the, I don't know why I feel this. I don't know why it is, but I really don't like it when this client arrives. I always get a bit nervous before they arrive, Rory. That would be fantastic supervision work, looking at transference and counter transference, because there's something there somewhere when it's in the I don't know why. But there are other occasions where we might not like a client because of the language they use. They may use harsh, strong, swearing language. It might be who they are and the way they are and how they've been brought up in life, and they may present with that, and that may clash against your values or a way that you feel. And then we look at again, getting into supervision. This also lives in supervision, and looking at how you can put yourself aside. How you can put yourself aside and look at this person as a fellow human being. Because when you strip everything away, when you strip it all away, including the narrative that the person is bringing and who they are, how they present, it's two human beings sat in a room with one sharing the pain that they are facing at some level in their life. And us as therapists being there to hear that. The rest is narrative and how someone is presenting, I guess.
Yeah, and I think a good maxim for being a therapist is a quote by the philosopher Terence, who said, "I am a human. Nothing human is alien to me."
Yeah,
and we do meet as therapists people who have very opposing views. I guess in the time we live in, politics would be something that maybe people would struggle with. Someone who has a very strong political affiliation, either to the left or to the right. That could be a struggle for some people. But ultimately, the client has come to us to assuage or to explore or to heal some sort of pain. And that's our work. Our work is to help them to understand themselves a little better, maybe develop a more robust way of dealing with their lives. And in my experience, people who have very, very strong views on things Usually it's a defense mechanism against something that's internalized for them. So as you're working with them, it's amazing how people's views can change through the arc of therapy. And, it's not our job to change people's outlook on the world. But as they become freer in themselves, they may become less defensive. They may become more open to experience, open to others. So in that way, we can really help people. But it is interesting. And one of the things I often say in supervision to my supervisees, who undoubtedly will be listening to this podcast, I say to them, if you were on the train with this person, you didn't know them, you're on a train from London to Manchester, there were no stops, there was only you and this person in the carriage, would you talk to them? Would you sit with them? Would you strike up a conversation? And if the answer to that is yes, then the next kind of inquiry that I'd make as a supervisor is, why? What is it that you'd want to know more about this client? Oppositely, if they said no, I'd ask the same question. What is it about this client that you wouldn't want to do that? And it's amazing how far you can get in supervision just by asking the train question.
Yeah, it's nice. The technique is a reframe. So it's looking at it from a very different point of view. So maybe, we spoke about phenomenology in our last topic, Rory, and how we live and experience the world consciously. And I guess when we think about, so I'm trying now to put myself in a mindset of thinking about somebody that I really don't like or don't get on with, and I'm really struggling, to be honest. I guess there was a time in my life, so I'm going to go back to as a younger man. If I had to think about that person, what would happen is emotions would come up inside me almost immediately. They were triggered, and it made thinking clearly, rationally, quite difficult. And reframing takes you out of the emotion of the situation. So when you're saying on a train, Rory, now you got the supervisee or whoever's bringing this in thinking about through a little frame of seeing themselves on a train, and it takes the emotion out of the situation. Similarly, you might use the desert island. Yeah. If you and this person were marooned on a desert island and you had to set up camp, where would your camp be? Where would their camp be? Would you share meals together? How would you get on? And just somebody speaking through how that might be is interesting to kind of look what plays out. If this person was an animal, what animal would they be? What animal would you be? So if they would be a bird and you would be or if they would be a cat and you would be a bird, is there an overpower feeling there? It's you can play with that reframing. I think that's a good place to go, specifically when you're speaking about transferential stuff cropping in there.
Absolutely. And if you're listening to this and this is something you're experiencing, you might take some solace into the fact that Carl Rogers himself experienced this. Rogers, when he was kind of traveling the world, developing his theory, went to South Africa during the height of apartheid, where black people were segregated, they were second-class citizens, they were brutalized. And he counselled an officer in the South African army, which was part of the mechanism that oppressed black people quite straightforwardly. And he was very worried if he could offer unconditional positive regard to this person, but he bravely, and I think it was bravely, met this person and encountered this person for a session. And interestingly enough, the actual client said that Rogers was really empathic, that Rogers really tried to see his world, didn't detect any resistance. And I think that sometimes we can overthink our resistance to clients. I think sometimes it comes back to phenomenology. Our frame of reference about how we're engaging with clients and how they receive us can be two different things. And that really played out in Rogers' encounter with this South African officer. But yeah, we meet clients that sometimes, have different values to us, have different views of the world to us, some that grate, some that kind of bump. And as Ken said, the best place to take that is to supervision, to try and unpack it and look at our own value system and see how we can limit the kind of bump in the therapy room, I think.
Thank you, Rory. Great topic. Thank you for bringing that today. Counselling a client that you don't like. Have a think about it. Rory and I are not the experts. We can't tell you how it is in your practice. This is for you to have a look at, journal about it. And if you have got anything that comes up for you, take it into supervision. It really is good material to work through in supervision from a professional and personal development standpoint. We now move into Practice Matters. That's the CPD section of today's episode. An interview with Meg Moss, Head of Policy and Public Affairs at the National Counselling Society, soon to become the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, if you're listening in the future to this episode. And
Yes.
This is part of the thing we're doing of kind of pulling that curtain back, Rory, having a look. What does a professional body do?
Indeed, you've said all I need to say, really, Ken. But just to remind everybody, we've had a season of looking at a professional body, looking at the different aspects of what a professional body does. I met up with Meg Moss again. We've heard from Meg before on the podcast. She's the Head of Policy and Public Affairs at the National Counselling Society, soon to be, if you're listening in the future, National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society. And she talks about the campaigning aspect of their work. And I have to say that there is a very, very strong call to action in this section that the National Counselling Society are promoting. So we caught up with Meg, and this is what she had to say.
Practice Matters.
And we welcome back Meg Moss, who's Head of Policy and Public Affairs at the National Counselling Society, soon to be the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society. So Meg Moss, welcome back.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for having me back again. I'm very delighted to be here, especially because today we get to talk about campaigns, which is my current favourite thing to talk about. So I'm feeling very lucky that I get to come here and chat about that with you. So my role has changed. Obviously, I think I might have talked about this a little bit. I used to be the CEO of the society, and I've moved over into Head of Policy and Public Affairs because I think we needed to do more in terms of political engagement and campaigning. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm really expanding that element of what the society does because it's not something we've ever done in the past. And now I get to talk about it, which is really exciting.
Well, I mean, thank you for that introduction. And I guess the first question, which might be an obvious question, but I think it's one to start off with. Why is it important that professional bodies, or why is it important that the National Counselling Society gets involved in campaigning? What is the importance of that campaigning aspect of the society?
That is a really good question. And that's something that I was thinking about before we spoke today. So the reason that we've been investing more time into campaigning is because the direction of travel in terms of mental health provision in the UK is more and more down the path of digitization or the expansion of low intensity, low level roles, moving further away from counselling and psychotherapy. And this is something that we really want to prevent and reverse. So one of the things that we are doing is highlighting the role of counselling and psychotherapy in mental health provision and the reason why that's important.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like part of your role is speaking to power, if you like. Part of your role will be to, I guess, engage with the governments of the day or the governmental departments of the day and to raise awareness of where counselling fits in mental health and its importance in amongst all the other, you've talked about low intensity and other forms of help, but why it's important still for counselling to have a role in our society's mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know when you're training to become a counsellor or a psychotherapist, you may not think about the political side of things, but it really does come down to policy level. especially in terms of the NHS or in terms of education. We talk about having counsellors in schools. We talk about having counsellors available on the NHS. That is really a governmental level that we have to engage to make sure that counselling and psychotherapy is not forgotten about, versus all of the other interests that we have. So you have the digital tech mental health care companies that have a big interest in making sure that people use their services. You have psychology and CBT representation who want the government to, work with their practitioners. And we really need to make sure that counselling and psychotherapy are represented. And, obviously for our members, but also for society as a whole, a lot of the work that I've been doing, it has become more and more clear how vital what counselling and psychotherapy can do for people is. So you have your low intensity work, your psychological wellbeing practitioners, your kind of CBT practitioners, and then you have your crisis services. You have, for children and young people, you have CAMS. It's really hard to get an appointment with CAMS. It's really hard to get crisis services. To be honest, wouldn't it be better if we didn't need those things? So we have this whole missing middle of people who are not, who the low intensity stuff isn't appropriate for, and they're not at the level yet of needing those kind of crisis, high intensity services. But because there is no support there for them through the NHS, through the schools at the moment, those people in this kind of missing middle are rapidly becoming the people that need those crisis services. And so recently, in the spring budget, which was recently announced by Jeremy Hunt, they talked about investing £10 million into voluntary organisations, volunteer and community organisations to provide support for people who are at risk of suicide, which is good. But I would also say that on the flip side, they're talking about investing an even greater amount of money in digital mental health care, which is not good. And you see that, so there's this middle bit that they're just going to go further and further and further down this route of potentially becoming more and more mentally or emotionally distressed. They're going to get to these crisis services, which are now better funded, for sure. That's good, I suppose, but we don't want them to get there. And how do we convey to the government that this perhaps wasn't the best way of using that money? And so that's what we're kind of trying to do, right?
I think it's really interesting is that what we're really talking about here is commissioning services, where services are commissioned, and they're commissioned on the behest of, I guess, what funding is available and government intervention. So by giving a voice and talking about the benefits of counselling and psychotherapy, you're putting the case, you're putting your members' case and the case of counselling in general to those who are in power and saying, look, there's a missing bit in the middle here. We don't.
Yeah.
Yes, you've funded crisis services, but actually we can halt the move into crisis services by providing funding now for counselling and psychotherapy, so people wouldn't get to that state. I'm getting quite animated talking about this. It's quite a powerful debate, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really, really important. And I think the more I look into this, I produced a briefing note for the Labour Party for their manifesto not long ago. And putting that together and looking at all the statistics, looking at the data, looking at the research, it is just painfully clear to anyone who wants to sit down and understand it what is happening in the UK at the moment. And there is absolutely a solution there. But it's just, like you say, it's shouting at the people who make these decisions, who need to know that, and hoping that they listen, and hoping that there is more of a long-term view taken, because, you know, digital mental health care is pretty cheap. It's cheaper than providing opportunities for counsellors and psychotherapists to support people, let's be honest. But what you're going to then do is save money further down the road, because you're not having to pump more money into crisis services. You're then also not going to have to pump more money into other areas of the NHS. So, for example, things that come up with mental ill health where it's untreated, things like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, all of that kind of stuff. You're then saving money because you're reducing the load further down the line. So we need people to be taking more of a long-term view, and how do we get them to do that? And I don't know if towards the end of a governmental cycle we will make that much difference, which is why we are also kind of working on the potential successive governments at the moment. I think that's probably the right thing to do, as well as still working with the current government to see if we can help shape policy. But we're also taking a much more forward view of what might happen in the UK to see if we can influence also further down the line with people who might be more inclined to take a longer view.
Yes, and I think I'd pick up on that, because it takes a long time to commission services. They spend public money, and there has to be inquiries and evidence bases, and then they have to recruit, then they have to look at the demographics. It's not quite as easy as a lot of people think, that we'll just open up here, there and everywhere and put people in. Or maybe it is that easy. Maybe it's a bit overcomplicated. Maybe it would just be a case of, sticks, there's lots of people who have got mental health issues and emotional issues, in Bradford. Let's open a centre there. Could be that easy, but I'm sure that there are other, I'm sure in the kind of mechanisms of government, there's differences. However, what I'm hearing is that you're kind of spreading your message widely. You're not only working with the current government, and at the time of recording this, which is March of 2023, the current government, the current Conservative administration here in the UK, is coming to the end of its cycle. There'll be an election within the next 18 months, maybe 2 years. And of course, you're speaking to their biggest rival politically, which of course is the Labour Party, and putting your ideas to them. You're spreading the message about, and and should the government change, then you'll have briefed that incoming government.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, we're talking as well to any MPs or any special advisors, to MPs, anyone who will listen at the moment, because the more people that are aware of this, the better. One thing I do want to say, actually, because you were talking about how easy it would be to commission these services, one of our campaigns is about direct access to counselling, which works on utilising the accredited register programme for GPs to be able to refer people directly to a counsellor of their choice who is on an accredited register. Because one of the most important things, and I know that you know this because we talked about common factors before, is your relationship with your therapist, your motivation to engage with the therapy, and your belief that it will work. So choosing a therapy and therapist that you kind of vibe with and works for you is going to be so much more effective than being given a therapist and offered 6 sessions of CBT or some guided self-help that actually you don't really want, but that's what's given to you. So you're going to have much more efficacy in therapy by allowing people that kind of autonomy and empowering them to really invest in their own mental health care. And they're doing that in other areas of the NHS anyway. But they're having more patient-led care where patients have more control over what it is that they're like engaging with the NHS. So we should be doing the same here. It's one of the most kind of human ways of working, and we somehow seem to be taking the humanity out of it at the moment.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I'm so pleased you brought up common factors, and for those people who've listened to the podcast for a number of years, common factors was a result of work done at Scranton University in Philadelphia, I think, and also a massive piece of research that was done in the early 2000s with the American Psychological Association, and they looked for what were the best outcomes of therapy for clients, and what was that formula, if you like. And that formula, as you say, is the relationship with the therapist, the motivation, and also the fact that to a greater extent the therapy is available, and that's what common factors is. Yes, I like what you're saying about the fact that they're going to use the accredited register, the Professional Standards Authority, the umbrella that's over the top of that, to actually say, look, here are quality therapists available now that you can tap into. You can tap into that resource. We know the quality of these people because they've gone through the appropriate trainings. And as a consequence of that, here they are. We've got a little army of helpers ready to go, and all you've got to do is provide the funding.
Yeah, exactly. And another benefit to the NHS budget is that these counsellors and psychotherapists are already trained. They've paid for their own training because this is what they really wanted to do, right? And a lot of them are working in private practice. They've paid for their own training. So you don't need to recruit. You don't need to train. You don't actually even need to do all of the HR management and all of that sort of thing, because they're self-employed, they're on an accredited register, but it's just to be able to refer to that resource. We did a survey a few weeks ago. 82% of practicing counsellors are available to work in less than 2 weeks. That's how long their waiting list is. So you could be cutting down waiting lists from goodness knows what it is, really. And I hear anywhere between 6 to 18 months for NHS talking therapies, previously known as IAPT. But then you have this resource that has a waiting list of 1 to 2 weeks that you could solve that waiting list problem immediately. There's 60,000 counsellors on accredited registers at the time of kind of going to print, as it were. We don't need to have this kind of lack of resources. The resources are there, but it's, how do we convey that? And that's really what I'm trying to do at the moment. Super, super passionate about it. And I'm talking about it to anyone, literally anyone who will listen.
Well, I think there'll be people listening today, Meg, and the idea that there is literally an army, I use the word advisedly, of helpers, professionally trained, compassionate people ready to step in to solve what, is arguably a mental health crisis in this country. All it needs is the will of the current administration to be able to harness that, and hopefully the mental health of our society would increase, and maybe those emergency services that are so well funded may not be needed as much. So, as always, Meg, it's a real pleasure to talk to you. So, Meg Moss, Head of Policy and Public Affairs at the National Counselling Society, soon to be the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, thank you for joining us.
Big thank you to Meg. Thank you to you, Rory, for reaching out, holding the discussions that need to be had. This is the Counselling Tutor Podcast. You have joined us at episode 264.
Yes, we started with theory and practice with phenomenology, and the philosophy of existence, if you like, how we view the world. Very interesting debate, and a little walk through the history of philosophy in counselling. In practice today, we talked about counselling a client you don't like, or maybe not your cup of tea, as we say in the UK. And then in practice matters, I caught with Meg Moss, and she talks about campaigns that the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society are running. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counsellor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counselor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counselor CPD Library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.